Cool. So just thanking you all for sticking around with us today. We've got to wrap out our program. You won't be disappointed. We've got a great discussion. Unfortunately, you may notice Stephanie couldn't join us. She had to call out this morning, but we're still going to have a great conversation. So without further ado, John, who are you? Why are you here?
John Wagner. I'm the Deputy Assistant Commissioner in Customs and Border Protection, and really here to talk about how we're solving an incredibly complex security challenge, but by focusing on the traveler experience and the customer experience.
Right. So, you're here. We're going to be talking about a few different CX things, but let's start with what's going on at airports these days. Flying, I don't know how many of you travel on a regular basis. It's usually an aggravating experience for me. And you all had a mandate going back several years to introduce new technologies. One time, you and I were chatting, and you mentioned that it looked like it was actually going to really slow things down getting these biometric technologies in place, but then something happened. Can you talk us through that journey?
Sure. I mean, any international travelers in the room? Any global entry members? Best program in government, right? We had made a lot of progress over the last few years, using biometrics, using self-service kiosks, global entry, automated passport control, getting rid of the paper forms people fill out, that customs declaration, that blue card. It's almost gone, right? And the hardest part's finding the pen when you're on the plane, right, to fill it out, right? And the poor flight attendants, they can only carry so many pens around. And then the mobile phone application, mobile passport control, but we wanted to build different opportunities for people to engage with us and complete their immigration and customs and agriculture screening requirements in a way that they were most comfortable doing. So, we had people that wanted to pay the fee and enroll and be part of the Global Entry Club, the Trusted Traveler program. We linked pre-check and TSA benefits to that. We linked it to other countries around the world. We built the automated passport control kiosks, which was people that maybe not want to enroll, but want to also use a kiosk for part of a more facilitative process, or people that wanted to use their personal phone to download an app and engage with us to do this. We were challenging ourselves, okay, well, what's next? What's next? What are we going to do? We've got, 60% of the people are using kiosks or one of these programs. What are we going to do to continue to meet the 5% growth in international travel that we've seen year over year for the last 5 or 6 years? Couple this with a requirement from Congress called biometric entry-exit, and we had done the entry piece in 2006, I think, but we could never, I want to say we, the bigger DHS, could never figure out a way to collect biometrics from departing foreign visitors in a way that wouldn't create gridlock at the airports. And all the attempts to look at this all looked at the program itself and collecting those biometrics in isolation.
So when you're at that point in your process, right, where you're looking at just the program and what you're trying to achieve, if you had stopped there and implemented the program, what would it have looked like today?
It would be miserable. It would be yet another requirement for only certain people to have to go through to get on board the aircraft. And really, the challenge at the airports, it's one of logistics, in that we never put departure controls in the United States, unlike a lot of European and Asian and other countries around the world, where you go through a border control or immigration officer to depart that country and get your passport stamped with a departure stamp. So in the US, the airports are configured such that there's no exclusive international departure location. So international and domestic flights commingle within the terminal or even at the gates, or with that. Once you go through TSA, it's a mixture of international and domestic departures. So there's no clear place to collect a biometric from just foreign citizens without setting up like an exclusive process just for them. And when you talk about the logistics of where and how you would do that, yeah, you could put, self-service kiosks there if people could find them, figure out how to use them, and figure out who's supposed to use them. You could do it at the airline boarding area, but then are we going to ask the airlines to separate out who's an American citizen versus a foreign national, who's in scope or out of scope? What does it do to the boarding process? Hey, I'm a frequent flyer, I'm supposed to board first, right? How do we just mess up their entire business model and create even more congestion in that boarding area? You know, and you know what it's like to board a plane. It's just everybody's jockeying around to be next in line because you want to get your overhead space, right? You want to get in your seat and try to get comfortable. So injecting another layer, another process, another confusion point into that would really just, if done wrong, it could be miserable. And this is what I think the government struggled with for a dozen or so years to figure out a way to do this.
Because I imagine that would even affect American citizens just because of further delays from sorting people and extra queues and all these things.
Exactly.
So instead of taking that approach, you look to make things less miserable and you reached out to the people, and what happened there?
So, we've done a lot of work with the airlines and airports over the years. We have very strong relationships with them. We took this project over a couple years ago, and, we knew we couldn't just take the typical government approach, which, okay, we got a mandate from Congress, we got some funding, we'll go, buy 5,000 things, nail them to the floor, and make people line up and go through it and publish regulations because it's the law, and just throw the impact on the public and the stakeholders and say, you deal with it, right?
I mean, you could have done that.
We could have hit the easy button and just said, okay, and hide behind the law and just say, okay, well, Congress is happy, they'll stop yelling at me. I did what they told us to do multiple times. There's been several pieces of legislation over the years requiring this. This goes back to the 9/11 Commission. This goes back to identifying visa overstays. There's a lot of national security and, a lot of emotion attached to this, and well placed. I mean, this is an important issue for us. But, when we looked at it, we said, what if we didn't take that approach, which got nowhere, right? The airlines and airports were vehemently opposed to this, rightfully so. We said there has to be a better solution here. That do we solve this challenge by making it bigger? We take a big insurmountable problem and we make it even bigger and try to solve it that way. And could we devise a process rethinking and re-engineering how we collect and use biometrics? And could we do it in a way where now the government is more of a service provider, and we figured out a way using data we already had, right? So we're not even really collecting new data or additional data from people, but using it in a way that we can do what we call a tokenless identity confirmation and figure out and confirm somebody's identity within about 2 to 3 seconds, where they don't actually even have to present a document to do so.
So what does that program look like if I was to be boarding an international flight today from, say, Dulles? What would that process look like, and how is it different? In what ways is it different than the old way?
Right, so we looked at, what are the business models of the airlines? How do they board people? What are they concerned about? How do they line people up? What do they have to do? They're manually checking passports at the gate because they have to ensure they board the right person. They're reading your boarding pass from a piece of paper or your phone and the barcode. We looked at TSA. Well, okay, what are they doing? Again, they're also looking at your identity document manually, and they're also looking at your boarding pass and manually circling it to make sure you're on the right flight. And, what's the public's expectation? What do people know they have to do at the airport already? I don't want to create a whole nother step and have to have people learn something new. Is there other behaviors that we can capitalize on to make this a really easy implementation? So when we got to the biometrics discussion, we looked at facial recognition and iris and fingerprints and all the other fancy biometrics that are out there. But, the fingerprint readers, even though they're getting easier and you can wave your hand over a fingerprint reader, you still have to train people then to do this. So you need somebody to stand there and tell people, no, just wave over it, don't instinctively touch it. We came upon facial recognition as the easiest thing for people to do because everybody knows how to take a picture, right? Every culture, every country, age, gender, doesn't matter. You say, look at the camera and smile. Everybody knows how to do that, and it's very instinctual and natural for people to do. So to answer your question, to make a long story longer, what we built was an identity, say, confirmation service, for lack of a better term. What we're really doing is just taking a traveler's picture, matching it up against a pre-staged gallery of their passport photographs. So you, as a U.S. citizen, you've given your picture to the Department of State. They've put it on a passport booklet, mailed you that passport booklet. there's an electronic file that then we can access to see your picture that's on your passport. A foreign national, if they get a visa, State Department collects the photo, puts it on the visa. They provide that to a DHS database. If you're a visa waiver traveler, we've taken your picture and your fingerprints when you arrived in the United States for the first time. So when you check in with the airline to depart the United States, international departure, you check in with your passport data. By law, that data comes to CBP. We take that passport data, we go assemble a gallery of photographs of who's on that flight. We put that into a cloud database, and it sits there and waits for you to get matched back up with it. So when you get to the airport, theoretically, any place you stop to show your ID could be replaced with a camera that just takes your picture, and the actual match time is less than a second because it only searches against people on that flight. So it's your picture against 2 to 3, 400, and it's very quick and it's very accurate to do that, and the green light can come on, and then you can proceed with whatever transaction that is. So, checking your checked bags, going to the TSA checkpoint, boarding the plane. Where we started with was boarding the plane. And a person can walk up when their boarding group is called, or it's their turn to board. So we don't change the airline sort of methodology on how they board. You walk up, and instead of presenting your passport and your boarding pass, you just walk up and smile, and your picture's taken, and you board the plane. And it's maybe a 2 to 3 second pause to do that. And what we found is the airports and airlines want to implement this a little differently. So we weren't prescriptive on how to actually do that. And some airlines seem to prefer a self-boarding gate. Other airports or airlines just want an iPad with a camera on it. And there's other iterations that people are deliberating about now where, so the government is built a service that's of use to the airline because it supports their business model, their own modernization initiatives. We're not being prescriptive on how they should do it because they know a lot better than us on their business model and how to do that, but it helps further their own plans, so we have aligned goals of what we want to do.
And you mentioned that it takes about 2 seconds, to give the clear, maybe even a little less, versus the multiple seconds it would take for someone to match your boarding pass and your passport and do all the things. What kind of result has that had?
Right, and then the hassle on you as a traveler fishing out your boarding pass again, or if you're the person who gets up there and your screen lock comes on and your phone shuts off, and then you're trying to unlock your phone while everybody behind you is grumbling, right? Or people can't find their boarding pass. People have the boarding pass in their mouth and then go to hand it to the airline person, right? And they go, also, this was really easy, right? And the airline goes, boy, this was really easy. What we've seen, some of the initial results is like at LAX and in Orlando where they have the gates for some of the European flights, the wide-body aircraft. They're boarding the plane and the big planes, the A380s, in about half the time. And they've cut that boarding process down to about 20-something minutes versus 40-something minutes. And, just by doing this piece of it. And biometric exit is getting done in the background without anybody realizing it.
That changes my calculus personally. I never understood the people lining up right away to get on the plane when you're just going to sit there cramped on the plane for 40 minutes while everybody boards. But now I might be rushing onto the plane to try to get some of that overhead bin because I'm not going to be there forever. I like that. So what's interests me about this whole program is a lot of times, throughout the day, we've been talking about including customer experience in your thought process as program managers in government. And so many times it's a bolt-on process where we have a thing, now let's make sure it has a good customer experience. I feel like you all came at it the reverse side, where you said, we're going to have a thing, but it's only because you focused on the customer experience that you got what you were looking for.
Right, because that brought our stakeholders to the table, right? We talked to them and, what are things we can help do, and can we build a service that helps support what they're trying to do? And we knew the key here was to bring on the stakeholders. We couldn't do this in isolation. We could, but we'd be failures. And if we could bring the stakeholders in and build one consistent, efficient process throughout the whole airport experience, that would get the maximum amount of stakeholder involvement and participation, which would make this a success. For my parochial need to get biometric exit done, we could get that done. My parochial view as an international traveler, it would also make life at the airport a lot easier and more consistent from people. And what we've seen is, people will use biometrics. They will, engage with technology if it makes the process easier for them. And if we could just build that simplicity in it for them, I think we'll make life a lot easier for the traveler then, and improve the security at the same time, so they're safer as well.
Right. So for your federal government colleagues in the room and watching online, what advice can you give them about how you did that engagement? One, starting from within your office, how did you preach that CX needed, that you had to take that focus? And then how did you go about getting the input you needed?
It's really understanding your stakeholders. It's building a relationship with them over time. We didn't come out and, cold and just knock on their door and say, hi, we're CBP. We had built up a level of trust and successes with the stakeholders over the years. So when we came to them with these ideas, they were willing to test it with us and willing to build it with us. So we collaborated early and often with the stakeholders. And then, understanding, what their goals were and could we build something that we thought could also meet their goals, but in a way that was very efficient, right? Internally, we challenged ourselves to utilize data we already had and tweak some systems and processes we already had to make this easy. What I mean by that is, when we use biometrics today, they're all associated with a passport. So you always have to read the passport first. It's like if you use global entry, you go up to the passport, you go up to the kiosk, you got to read your passport first, right? That actually does a biographic query, your name and date of birth and passport number, into the biometric database, and it finds your fingerprints and calls them up. And then you put your fingerprints down, and it does a 1-to-1 match and a 2-to-2 match. You just can't walk up to the kiosk and go, who am I? And put your fingerprints down, but you should be able to. And we looked at, okay, well, the airline's telling us who's on board. We built tools for some of our targeting and analysis and some of our national security reviews and law enforcement reviews that we do, that we can view people's biometrics on the basis of the airline data. So why couldn't we also just take that and retrieve it and set it aside to use when you show up at the airport and just make it a lot more convenient for you so you don't actually have to present your boarding pass?
You make all this sound so common sense. Was it like that when you were pitching it to your bosses, or did you really have to sell this to them?
No, I think when we came up with that concept and we could package that up, you're right, that's really easy. You've already got the data, but it's sitting over here in your agency, and you have a big agency. So how does the group over here know what this group is doing? So I'm fortunate that I can sit in a position and see a wide cut of what we do. But your individual program offices, you've got to make sure they're talking to each other. So even within the agency, you're not building your own stovepipes in isolation. So you have to build that across your organization. You have to break down some of those internal stovepipes. You've got to find some people willing to take that chance with you, some of the IT support that you need to say, yeah, I think that'll work.
And in your case, the stakeholders too. I'm thinking like the airport authority, for instance.
And then bringing it to like some airport authorities and airlines. Hey, can we try this out with you? Can we build this with you? Or can you let us set this up so we can show you? And that was one thing we did, because we had a lot of skeptical people. We purchased 5 or 6 cameras, and we just put them out there and put them in front of the boarding areas to show people how easy this was, right? How simple this was, and how intuitive it was for people, and they could see it and then start their own sort of intuitive thinking and say, geez, what else could we do with this? And could we tie it into the boarding pass? Could we tie it into checked baggage? Hey, could TSA use it? Could we help with some of their congestion? And what are the different, say, form factors that we could develop this with a camera? And I think it's open. We're seeing a lot of enthusiasm and excitement now around developing applications to support this and different ways to do it. And again, this is where the vendor community comes in too, with a lot of expert ideas and different ways to think about doing this. So we almost have this free-for-all of ideas now, all coming in to want to solve the biometric exit challenge, right? Whereas a couple of years ago, this was like taboo to even think about. It was just like, nobody wants to do that. Nobody saw the value in it. Now all of a sudden, we've got a valued service that really is going to change that dynamics of airport travel.
Excellent. And I'm going to come back to that in just a second. As I do, though, I could talk all day. Very interested in hearing all of your questions as well, if you have any for John, either about CX or the biometric program. We got one right up here. Well, we got a live stream, so just hold on a second. The mic's coming to you. 1 second.
Hey, thanks. I'm with Adobe, but I think this is actually really cool. There's a company that does some of this already at Dulles Airport, like Clear, where you do the biometrics, the fingers.
That's him.
That is you?
No, that's a private company.
Oh, yeah, that's a private company, but it does what you're saying, but they're only on the exit part. They're not like at the
Right.
luggage and all that stuff.
Right.
So is this in the same kind of format and less expensive and easier to use?
Similar concept.
Yeah.
In that you're using a biometric to confirm your identity to make life easier. With Clear, the difference with this is there's no re-enrollment. So you've got a U.S. passport, you're already enrolled. We're not asking you to come give another biometric or give any additional information. You've already enrolled with the U.S. government by virtue of getting a passport or as a foreign national, getting that visa or permission to travel here. So everybody's already enrolled, and we're just repackaging that same information that's going to be used in places where there's a manual review of that right now with a human being, really just using a computer algorithm to help make that determination that you are that same person. And by doing that, it's a lot quicker and easier and more efficient and more secure to do that. And that's where the biometric exit mandate gets fulfilled to do that. Now, this is only applicable to international travel. So what Clear has is, the TSA security screening portion, which also includes domestic travel in that. We're talking with TSA. We're piloting with them using this at some of their checkpoints, like at LAX, where it's mostly international travelers coming through. And I think we'll start to build this out with the international traveler, and then figure out the domestic piece on this. A lot more challenging, different expectations of privacy, different documents. DHS or CBP might not have access to those all the photographs, the complexity of driver's licenses, the politics of that. But I think as a service, it's a viable approach, and I think the public will want to opt in to some type of service. And how and where that gets done through a third party like Clear, through an airport or an airline themselves or TSA themselves, I think there's a lot to work out there still, but conceptually the same process could work. For domestic, though, they may have to be a re-enrollment of that. But hey, I've got a U.S. passport, right? I've got a global entry card, right? I've got a Virginia driver's license. I would love to tell TSA through the airline, look, I'm flying from Dulles to L.A., get one of those photographs, please, and just put it in that gallery so when I show up, you just take my picture. I think a lot of, at least frequent travelers, would want that and make things easier through all those transactions, and then also use it for boarding the plane. So I think we're opening this Pandora's box of a lot of good ideas, and we'll see how those things fit in.
And you mentioned, you mentioned before as well that you're getting all these ideas, all this feedback. And I feel like sometimes when you're successful at something, you just pat yourself on the back and you move on, right? So as you're trying to incorporate all these new things, do some of these even harder domestic things that you're talking about, how are you making sure you don't lose the user along the way?
Well, there's a lot of different users in this case, right? There's the traveler, right? And we know that one of the keys to success is making life easy for the traveler. But we know we've also got to keep them secure, right? And that's our major responsibility as a government, is keeping air travel secure and safe for people. But that doesn't mean that's in opposition to also being facilitative or efficient. And by building good security into this, we can build the efficiency in for the traveler of that. The other end is our own workforce, right? Our officers, we've got to retrain, rebuild some of the processes, the technology they're using. This can be difficult within government then, the whole change management piece. We love our paper forms, we love our processes. We're breaking down a lot of that, and it's a different environment for our officers now in having confidence in the technology, making sure it works, making sure it's accurate, making sure it's reliable, and that they can count on it, and what's their role in this, that it's not replacing them, it's helping them make the decisions. And then the other one's the stakeholders, right? So are they aligning their business models to take full advantage of this, and will they partner with us on this without us having to mandate on them? And we don't want to be in a position where we have to tell the airlines, you must do this, but rather we're building this ecosystem that you can take advantage of. Come along. In fact, you should insist we do it this way, right? Rather than compelling you to do it.
Because it turns out better for everybody that way.
Right.
So we got about 5 minutes left. We can fit in a few more questions if we have them. We got one in the back there. James, we can get you later.
Hi, so I actually work for TSA, and I have a question related to the customer experience piece. I see that you work in field ops, and I was just wondering, how did you get your officers buy-in? How did you present the necessity of balancing security with the customer experience? That's something that we're struggling with, so any advice that you have?
No, you're right. It's a tough one. We've trained our officers. I'll speak from the CBP experience. We've trained them very specifically on these are the procedures you must do, or you'll get in trouble if you skip these. We're a law enforcement organization. It's command and control, right? There are procedures how to do things. And you're revising all them, and you've trained people to do this. You've drilled it into their heads that these are the steps you got to do, and now you're undoing all of that. And we find ourselves in a position now we're moving more into an unscripted environment with our officers and getting back to more of developing the interaction with the traveler, asking the intuitive questions, because that's really the officer's role, is to determine the purpose and the intent of travel, right?
And it almost sounds like make it so people aren't computers, right? They're not just ticking boxes.
Right. And yet we had this robotic process that we developed over the years, and you see the officers in the booth doing these road administrative tasks, and we're unscripting that now and focusing more on, your role as the officer. You're determining a person's intent and purpose of travel, and you're judging the risk of what they might present. That do you need to send them in for additional inspection, or are they okay to go? And you do that by your intuitive style questioning. Where'd you go and why? How is the traveler responding to you, looking at the behavioral analysis, summarizing what our computer systems and our database checks and the technology is telling you, and making an assessment all within a few seconds. So changing that on the officer, after they're very comfortable in this scripted process, is something, we're embarking a whole campaign on to, one is the communication, right? This is the technology, this is what it does do, this is how it does it, this is what it doesn't do, and this is your role and our expectations of you as our employee within this new operation, right? But I think above all, it's building their confidence in that technology, that it's actually running the same system queries as they are in the booth when they manually read your passport. And you've got to demonstrate that for them and convince them it is accurate and it does work and it gives them the same results. I can't tell you how many times over the years, we hear some officers say, oh, that global entry key, that doesn't do anything, that's dumb, it doesn't even run any queries. It runs the same queries, it actually runs more, but we failed on the communication piece to reach every single one of our officers. And like TSA, we're a big organization spread out all over the country, so it's hard to reach everyone. So it's building that communication package to understand and have confidence in the technology, and then understanding what their role is within that it's not replacing them. It's more to support their decision-making. But at the end of the day, it's their decision, right? It's just a computer algorithm, in this case, that's helping them make a better decision. But again, it's not perfect. We need the officer there, the human being, really to make that final decision.
But on that change management side of that, we know it's not easy. We see it across government all the time trying to make that. So, real talk here, how much effort are you all going to have to put into retraining that staff, and how long is that going to take?
We're going to put a lot of effort into it because this project in particular is going to change a lot of how we do things. It will free us up from that booth with the plexiglass. It'll free us up from the hardwired desktop computer, right, with all the peripherals on it, the mouse and the keyboard, right? We're looking at wearable technology. I'm looking at body-worn cameras and smartwatches.
Like a body-worn biometric?
Well, just a body-worn camera that takes your picture as you walk up to me. Right. And on my watch, your picture shows up. Hey, Aaron, how are you? How was your flight?
I could use one of those in my life. Yeah.
And I could clear you as simple as going like this. Right? I think that's where we're going to get to, or on my phone, right? Or I could just take your picture on my phone and clear you as simple like this. That this will open up a lot of the consumer devices to what we want to do, and as we implement them into the workforce, who's been trained to stand behind a big old-fashioned desktop computer, right, with a mouse and a keyboard, to transition into this, type of consumer technology and stay current with all the capabilities that come with that, it opens up a world of flexibility into how we actually do our operations. So we've really got to work through what this means for our workforce. And, the way people line up in queue through airports today is going to change dramatically in the next couple of years. This isn't too far off. I mean, this is going to start, very, very soon, within months. And as we start rolling out some of the newer technology, it's getting them comfortable with it, so they got to have the confidence in it. So we're going to put a huge effort into it, but I think we've got a pretty flexible and resilient workforce because of the work we've already done with, the global entry, the automated passport control kiosks, getting rid of the paper forms.
They're getting used to things changing.
Yeah, but that's also a source of stress on them. When things change all the time, hey, when am I just going to understand what I'm supposed to do and just let it be for a while, right? You're constantly changing things. I mean, these are sources of employee stress, in any agency or any corporation, really, right? The continued changing nature of things. So we've got to over-communicate with them personally, in writing, through all types of, any type of engagement. It's going to be a big effort. Probably take us at least a year to get through, but I've got a team led by an executive focusing just on this part of it. I've got another team building the technology. Right? We've got our IT shop, which actually builds it, but I've got our operational shop building and owning the operation. But then I have a group set aside just working on the communication piece and, delivering that message and what the possibilities are for the workforce.
Is that group something that had to be set up, or is that institutionalized at CBP?
I think this time we set this up specifically, looking at, some of the things we could have done better with global entry or automated passport control internally, and some of the changes we made. We got rid of the I-94, a paper form, and, a lot of officers were comfortable holding that form because it gave them certain pieces of information. They might not have ever even used it, right? And they can look it up in the computer if they want to, but when you change it and didn't have it in their hand, and they didn't understand why. They didn't understand the bigger benefits of why we got away from that and what it brought us and how that freed up their time to do other things, right? Like ask a second or third question of a person, do more law enforcement type work. We didn't communicate that well, so we were making a conscious effort this time to communicate these changes.
Excellent. So we are out of time for now, but John, I think you'll be sticking around with us for just a little bit afterwards in case some people have some questions. Great. And before we wrap up, don't go anywhere just yet, though. James will be back up here because, while we're done for today, this is not the end of Festival. So stick around for just a bit here to hear more about it. And please join me in thanking John for joining us here today.
Thank you.